For my third, maybe I can make it to hands and knees.
All right. So I cannot be the only one here that during COVID, you make Instagram friends that are kind of like your real friends now, and you really just want to hang out with them all the time. So that's my guest, Sara Tanza, this morning. I found her on Instagram because she's a physical therapist, hangs out with runners. I think I found you through Celeste Goodson, and I just started following her. I'm like, oh my God, you're so cool. Started DMing you, and you're on the other coast, but I'm like, I want to hang out with you. So this is the first time we've actually talked. So this is my Instagram friend, Sara Tanza. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Carrie. I feel the exact same way about you. So I'm just so glad that Instagram brought us together. And there's so many hard things about social media, but
I
you are
know.
a very good thing about social media.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, tell everybody kind of where you are, what your practice is, kind of your family. You've got a couple of kids. Get to share all that fun stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I'm Dr. Sara Tanza. I'm a physical therapist out in California. Specifically, I'm in Santa Cruz, kind of a little bit south of San Francisco and north of Monterey. And I've been a physical therapist for about 10 years. I started actually actually thinking I was going to be in sports medicine, work with athletes, woo woo, right? But instead, I actually fell in love with neuro for a little bit. And so I did the PNF residency, so proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. It's like a big word vomit at Kaiser Vallejo here in the Bay Area.
Oh, wow.
And I thought I was going to go for 6 months, learn all these cool neuromuscular retraining things, and then go back and use them with athletes in the ortho world. Because I kind of started going down the ortho track actually before that too, but got there, fell in love with the neuro population. So worked with spinal cord stroke, traumatic brain injury, et cetera, for about 4.5, 5 years. And that was really awesome because it was the kind of place where you were training, right? It wasn't like we're recovering from pain. We're actually training to be better at function, right? And I love that. I mean, it's a drug, right, Carrie? It's like helping somebody walk for the first time or hug their spouse or be able to dance at their kid's wedding, right? You activate a muscle. It is a drug. But then also there's so many lows. There's so many hard parts. But anyway, I left that job actually to move back to Santa Cruz. I knew we wanted to have kids and be near family. My husband's family and my family are from here. Okay. And so I actually fell back into ortho. I'd done like a manual therapy certification while I was in the neuro field, which was kind of weird. But I also at that point had realized that every neuro patient is actually an ortho patient. So you have a spinal cord injury, but guess what? You have to use your shoulders all day. And so being able to have good manual skills and be able to work on that person's shoulder was such an important thing. And that was something that was not really happening in the neuro field, right? So I always knew that like all these fields really should be interconnected.
It's gonna be a mashup,
Yeah, right? And so came back to Santa Cruz, jumped into a more traditional ortho practice, but obviously quickly when I was pregnant, fell in love with pelvic floor physical therapy, as we all do, right? One thing that drew me to that though, it was something that was missing from ortho for me was getting people back to these like really functional parts of their life again. So, I have an ankle sprain and I'm just, a dude with an ankle sprain. Sorry to the guys out there, but and I'm just pregnant. I'm in, had pelvic pain. I'm just like, I don't really care about your ankle sprain. Like this is I don't know. I was just getting all these pelvic patients and realizing that, quality of life, I'm peeing in my pants and I can't, walk with my baby. I mean, I had that with my first, I had some like urinary urge incontinence right away. And I'm, walking along the ocean with my coffee in hand and my cute baby on me, but then I'm walking by a bathroom and peeing in my pants once I see a bathroom. Oh, man. And that's horrible, right? That was the thing that like functional, right? That's all we wanted to do. And so pelvic floor really started to fill a need for me that I was missing in the traditional ortho population of returning people to, can I have sex? Can I, pee and poop? Can I, without, when I want to and when I don't want to?
Exactly.
Can I not feel like my vagina is falling out of my body all the time? And then I was able to kind of mesh that kind of with the ortho world and the sports performance world and use some of the neuromuscular retraining principles that I had learned when I worked with those spinal cord patients and whatever. And so I I opened my practice actually 4 months after my second son was born. So I now have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Oh
I
my
just
goodness.
I kind of dove into that right afterwards. I knew I was going to open something eventually, and I didn't want to go back to my old job and then feel like I was just kind of deserting them. So I was like, let
Yeah.
me just have a fresh start. So I started my practice, Pelvic Potential, about 4 years ago, and that's based on one of the founders of PNF, Maggie Knott. She had the quote that every human being has untapped, unlimited potential.
I
And I
love
just
that.
love that. Right. And so I think that we can use that with all of our patients and ourselves. And
So you've really done the ultimate mashup, neuro, sports, ortho, pelvic, like you've kind of just put them all together, and that's what pelvic potential sounds like it is. Yeah.
exactly.
Oh
And
my
because,
gosh.
we all have so many dynamics of our lives, and just being able to address, I think that's what I do in my practice now. Like people come in and they say like, oh my God, I have this and this. You probably don't even want to treat me. And I said, that's why I opened this practice. Like I want this to be multidimensional, and I want to talk about every single aspect of your life and how it relates to what's going on.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So yeah.
And I don't know that it's, I came from kind of traditional sorts of practice as well. And I don't know that that's valued as much, especially when you're turning over and, seeing 1,000,001 patients and that sort of thing. So that's awesome. You get to do that. And for you, your background too, like you've been a runner for how long?
Yeah, I've been an athlete. I think all my life. I ran and swam a little bit in high school, and then I did
Hmm.
triathlon in college at UC
Oh,
Santa
cool.
Barbara, and coached some indoor cycling classes through PT school, and ran a lot through PT school, obviously. And
Yeah.
so now I consider myself just just a recreational runner, right? But we're all runners. Doesn't matter what level we are. So yes, I love the running world. That's one of the places where my practice I think really hits a sweet spot, is where running and pelvic health really, intersect.
Yeah.
But since I've started my practice, I do work with a lot of runners, but I just work with a lot of athletes as well. And, we're all athletes and we can all learn from each other. And whether I'm working with a pro athlete or someone who's just off the couch, we all really have the same struggles, right? And the more and more athletes I work with, that's what I see, is that we're all so
Yeah,
similar.
no, totally. So for you, like, being a mom, being an athlete, what are some of the most common challenges that you see when moms are trying to get back or kind of find themselves athletically after they have kids? What are those big challenges that you see the most?
I think, and I see this actually the most with just like the mid level, recreational athlete. I think we all have this, mindset of what it means to get a workout in, comparing ourselves to where we were beforehand.
Yep.
And I found that a lot postpartum of, oh, I can't go for just a 20-minute run. Like who would do such a thing, right? I
At
want to run for an
40 or
hour.
bust, right?
For your best, right? It doesn't
Yeah,
count. So I think that's one thing I've really seen, is like, even personally for me, like embracing the power of the 2-mile run, right? Or whatever that means to you.
right.
The idea that working out for 5 minutes is better than no minutes at all. I think one thing that's challenging, and I think that the pro athletes do it better than the recreational athletes sometimes, is adjusting what you're doing that day based on how you're feeling. And so one thing I've seen
Yeah.
in my practice that I'm sure you've also seen in your practice is that things like pelvic organ prolapse are so dependent on like sleep and stress, right?
Yep.
Sometimes more so than anything else.
Exactly.
And so, you're up all night with your baby and you're really stressed about something else also, and you have both of those things, yet on your schedule, you had a track workout that morning,
Right.
right? And then some of these athletes these recreational athletes maybe just go and do it anyway, rather than, I should bump that to tomorrow. I shouldn't try that today. I think that it's really common to compare ourselves to where we were during our pregnancies. So postpartum, I think people, maybe they went for a 4-mile walk the day they gave birth. And so 2 weeks after birth, they think they should go for that same
And
four
do it
mile walk
again.
again.
Yeah.
And I think that we really undervalue the fact that we are so different. And I always compare it to the NFL player who gets an ACL repair, right? Like they were playing in that game, very high level athlete, but when they have surgery, they can't go and play in a game a week later. They have to go through that same rehab process as everybody else, right?
It's so funny. I was just talking to a client yesterday that had a C-section, and she's a surgeon. And we had this conversation about mindset. And she mentioned like societal expectations of, oh, you're supposed to be back doing this, you're this and that. And I had to pause for a second because I'm like, out of due respect, I'm like, you guys don't help with this either. But we've known each other long enough that I feel like
Yeah,
I
you
can be
could do
upfront with
that.
her. But I was like, it's societal, but it's also, I think we can sit here and say it's societal and understand it logically.
Mhm.
But I think probably there's still a part of you and I that, yeah, we still have moments as humans where we're like, well, I should be here, or I should be there, or I should be doing better, or something along those lines. And so, yes, we have these external things that are on us, but there's still, to your point, the mindset of, I should be somewhere other than where I am. And
Mhm.
that ultimately, I think that's the biggest change I felt that came on after my second, because with the first, you know what the hell you're doing, right?
Yeah.
And so, but with the second, I was like, okay, slow my roll. I kind of know what I'm doing, but like, girl ain't got time for this, and we ain't even going to try. And so we'll get to this when we get to it. Whereas the first time around, I think we were much more methodical about getting stuff like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to check this box, I'm going to do all these things. And I think the second time you're too freaking tired.
Definitely. And, like for you, right? And for me too, I have two kids. It's an N of two, right? It's like, it's not like something where we have the opportunity to try something a gazillion times and then get it right
No.
the 25th time. This is
I
you and I had two shots so far at
Well,
postpartum.
and that's the funny thing. There's a part of me, I don't know if you feel this way, like, um, there's a part of me where I'm like, I bet if I had another, it would be the best one yet. My husband jokes, and I love my son dearly. Johnny, if you ever listen to this, mama loves you.
Mm.
And he's 11 now. God love him. And I was like, you know what? My husband's like, the first one's a throwaway. And I was like, oh, honey. But it also is hard because, like, I don't understand boys, and I'm still working on that. And so that's like a whole different,
That
that's
is so,
another
I know I
that's another
say that,
podcast.
Carrie, about my births. I'm like, okay, so my first birth, I'm like like exhausted in lithotomy on my back, like, all the things, right? And then
Yeah.
my second, I was like, good, maybe I can do something better. And I'm on my side. I'm yelling at the OB, I'm a pelvic PT. I'm only giving birth like on my side. And so I keep joking with my husband. I'm like, my patients, for my third, maybe I can make it to hands and knees. Maybe I can truly open. You know what I mean? It's just like, I think I could nail it if I did it another time.
Girl, I laminated my first birth plan in triplicate,
I'm sure I could see it.
because I was being thoughtful that they could still follow the directions with the slew of fluids around.
Yeah.
My son still has not read that birth plan and still has not followed any plans that I have had for him.
Oh, no.
No, and the
Uh,
second time around, I was like, okay, look, if my kids don't drop, they just don't. That's the deal.
yeah.
And the nice thing there was like, okay, if she doesn't drop, we ain't going through this whole like 3-day induction, pushing for a couple hours, and then we still end up in a C. We're just going straight to the C because ain't no shame in the C-section game.
Oh, and that's one thing I think not enough people realize. There's been, we both know the pendulum swings so
Yeah,
far both
yeah,
ways. And I think like we still are in this phase right now that VBAC is king, right? Vaginal
right,
birth after cesarean is
yeah,
like the only way to go. I'm not a warrior if I don't try for that. And
right.
that's something I've really seen. I had a great experience last summer. I got to be a part of my sister's planned C-section with her third. She'd
Oh,
had a vaginal birth with her first. She had a emergency C-section and at like 9.5 centimeters with her second, which was like 4 minutes, and the baby
yeah.
was out one.
Oh,
And so
wow.
for her third, like they went back and forth between the VBAC and the plan C, and ended up doing the plan C-section. And it was such a beautiful experience to be a part of. And I was at her first birth. I caught her baby the first time, which was so fun.
Oh,
And with our friend, her OB's arms around me, just in case I missed, obviously. But then being there for her third and just seeing like how powerful and beautiful a C-section can be. And then also, how her recovery was just really great afterwards. Like she was able
yes.
to be really intentional about it as well. And so, and then I've had patients that have had a really beautiful VBAC, and that
Yep.
was such a healing experience for them. But then I've had patients who've had a, plan, they tried for a VBAC, and converted to a C-section. And then that has been a very traumatic experience.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's no perfect birth.
Yeah.
And, that's been, and I think that's been something of like, there can be really great recoveries from C-sections as well,
Yes.
just like there can be great recoveries from vaginal
Yeah.
births and, horrible recoveries from C-sections or vaginal births as well. And I wish people really knew that, like, it's just like a race, right? We get ourselves to the starting line as healthy as possible, but then you never know about the conditions that day or how your belly
Exactly.
is going to react at the race.
Yeah.
And that's something I wish more people thought about.
I
And then
I
the
I
other thing
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
was just thinking, when you were saying, like, I wish more moms knew, one pattern I see in my practice that I'm just going to say that you probably see in your practice as well is something happens. I think it's usually between like the 4 and 8 month mark, and at that time people, maybe an injury pops up. Maybe they they actually didn't have any stress incontinence, and they, had been doing that same amount of activity for the past, let's just say 2 months at this point, and they
Mhm.
suddenly start getting some for the first time without
Yep.
really increasing their training. And they just get into a tailspin because
Yep.
they say, I'm 7 months postpartum. I should be blank here by now, right? And I think
Yes.
that, and I think I've been there, right?
Yeah.
I've had that narrative, even though I know it's not true. But what's really happening with those patients is that, and I explain this to my patients, I say, you've been doing this mom thing now for 6 months. You've been not sleeping normally. You've had like abnormal
It
cortisol
adds up.
levels.
Yep.
And yeah, it adds up. It's just like your bank account is just getting taken down every single day, right? And also maybe you've added in stressors like going back to work, for example,
Yep.
or maybe you have dialed up your training or whatever. And so that's one thing I wish more people who've had babies know, is just that, like, those things can pop up as well. It's not your fault. It doesn't mean that, like, you're doing a bad job, but it's something that it makes sense. Like, you've been doing this thing for a while. Is that
Yeah.
something you see also?
Yeah, I do. It's funny. There's a bunch of different times I see that. One is I think that's very similar around that mark,
Yeah.
and then another is actually coming into perimenopause, but people they don't know that that's what's coming, and like they thought they got off scot free with any
Hmm.
postpartum issues, and then here they are. They've got like a kid in middle school or something like that, and then they hop up off the saddle at Soul Cycle or something like that, and then all of a sudden they've got a leak and they
Hmm.
have no idea what happened. And chances are, with that shift in hormones, now all of a sudden you can start to see like it's like the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg is, and chances are they probably had some issues, but it wasn't
Hmm.
enough. But then when those hormones deplete, then all of a sudden it just kind of starts to show itself. So, but I think
Totally.
that goes back to expectations and kind of mindset where we started too, is if you don't have a sense, like if you think it's a straight shot forward, you're going to crash and burn when something like that happens, because you think, oh, well, now I'm off the rails, like I'm done, that's it. But I think understanding, and that's one thing I try and do with my clients, is like we try and lay out all the possible things that could be playing in, and like
Hmm.
what was happening around that time. Not did you do something that day, but like what's the buildup? Like,
Hmm.
and oh, both my kids had COVID, and then my in-laws moved in, and then my house burned down, or like crazy things like that. Like that stuff builds up. But people don't look at that. They're like, oh, if I'm leaking, something happened to my pelvic floor. I didn't do enough Kegels, and they give themselves a stupid Kegel guilt trip. When really it's not just the things that happened since postpartum, but what happened in delivery, what happened in the pregnancy. And oh, by the way, I used to pee when I was a kid and have constipation. So already I've got predispositions. So it's like, that's what I like to show people. I'm like, it's not this one moment. This
Hmm.
just happens to be when we're talking about it. But like the mindset around that is, it is like, no, it's in this one moment. And if I didn't get this right now, I'm basically screwed. I'm like,
Exactly.
you're not really screwed.
And it's funny, don't you think, how we look at pelvic floor symptoms in such an emotional way? There's such, because it's shame, right? It's like
Mhm.
we have this biological need to not want to have, like, especially pee and poop, like waste products
Right.
outside of our body unless we
Right.
want them to be, right? And so if, let's just say, we're fine, but now we've been overtraining a little bit, and we do a speed workout that's like a little bit outside of our comfort zone or something, and we leak, right? I tell, and patients like, oh my God, my pelvic floor symptoms are back. And well, yeah, they are. But also, how many times are you increasing your, distance and speed or whatever the thing is, and your old knee pain pops up again? And we don't
Right.
get into a tailspin about that because that's not as emotional as a problem. We say, oh, yeah, I've had that in the past. Like I do this, this, and this, and it goes away.
Yep.
Cool. And I tell my patients who have had pelvic floor dysfunction, I say, you know what, in some ways, like it's kind of a blessing because I mean, I found this in my own body where I'll have pelvic floor symptoms reoccur a little bit before I'll have other musculoskeletal
Yep.
symptoms, reoccur. And so maybe that can be a little warning light of, oh, girl, you're doing a little too much, right? And
Yep.
then you can kind of handle yourself, adjust your training load, maybe adjust your strength program probably as well before, that old knee injury then pops up again.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's one of the blessings of kind of all the return to run readiness screening stuff that has come
Yes.
up because we really didn't have anything I mean, sports ortho did. And I mean, you were probably like me, you just kind of bastardized what's out there for you, like, all right, I'll make something up. Right. And, you know, how many people like do you screen for postpartum stuff, but like ankle things come up or, and they don't have the strength to do a heel raise or something like that. And you're like, you're going to have shin splints. This is what's going to shut you down later, not necessarily your pelvic floor, but your shin splints.
Yes.
But then when you start to think about it, okay, well, if I totally believe that like, I don't know, at least over half of the pelvic floor stuff with sport doesn't have anything to do with the pelvic floor because if you have like if your ankle isn't absorbing force, if your knee isn't, if your hip isn't, guess who's left holding the ball? It's your pelvic floor. Your pelvic floor gets blamed for everything. It's such a freaking scapegoat.
Exactly. I know, poor thing, right?
It's not fair. It's really not fair,
And I have a really good example of this. And this is something that maybe some of the listeners and the pelvic PTs out there can try. And I'm sure this is something you do with your patients as well. I had a patient, a pro athlete and, same story, doing fine. And then around a certain time postpartum started leaking. Right. And,
Mhm.
We checked this person's pelvic floor and, all the things. Oh, not horrible. Like,
Yeah.
pretty good motor control, pretty good strength in supine, right? Like laying on her back. Got her up to standing and checked pelvic floor strength and standing, motor control and standing. Stood on one leg, really good, anterior, middle contractions, good release, like all the things we like, right? Awesome. Okay, cool. Went to the other leg. Okay, try contracting. Do
Nothing.
crickets, not a thing, right?
Yeah.
And then, oh, hey, that old, SI injury, that old hip injury,
Yep.
go back, work on SI, work on hips, start actually having more of a hip training program,
Yep.
rechecking pelvic floor strength, even with like a little bit of like in the moment PNF, like retraining. And oh, guess what? Pelvic floor strength was better. Did we suddenly like have better strength in the pelvic floor? No, it's the interconnection. And so
It's that
for
access.
and this
Yep.
is something that's really cool. I mean, like for people who maybe are having pelvic floor issues, like, and they are in standing, you can have my patients check this in the shower, putting your finger inside your vagina going next to your urethra. Try to do a contraction, see if you can do that in standing, right?
Yeah.
That's sometimes hard for a lot of people.
It is.
And
Yeah.
that's cool, that's fine, like, try on your back for a while. But if you can do that in standing, then try to stand on one leg, do a contraction, and then try to stand on the other leg and do a contraction. Or PTs, you can try that on your patients and
Yeah.
see if you see a difference. And sometimes it's so cool. And then adjusting, being able to train like single leg stuff or whatever you're doing
Yep.
to get that whole unilateral side stronger or more trained and in touch with the brain motor control. It's all just so weird right now. It's not just strength, but that can be huge and
Yeah.
it's awesome. And it's like, and then the pelvic floor then can be our signal that everyth's back online again, right? Just like it has
Exactly.
the
Yep.
signal that everything went offline.
Well, I think that's the nice thing sometimes about having just I love having a good pre-test post-test where it's like, if I do this, then we try this little intervention and then come back and check it again. And like what you're saying, like, but a functional one,
Yeah.
And I think that's where, I've been in pelvic health for 22 years, which makes me sound really old. Because I graduated when I was 12, right?
Yeah.
So, but like
you've seen the progression right at
but
the
I
field,
just,
which is
it's so
amazing.
funny when people come in and they're like, oh my gosh, why didn't anybody tell me? And they've got kids like my kids' age and that sort of thing. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like treatment back in the day was you stick your finger in, you put it on a tender spot and you hold 90 seconds and then like, is that better? I'm like, I hated it. It was so boring. And the fact that we're sitting here talking about a unilateral single leg stance contraction of the pelvic floor that might integrate with thank God, because
Yes.
the way pelvic health was in such a hole, like in actuality and pun intended. And thank
Yes.
God. And that's what I love about working with athletes is like, we are connecting it to movement. It's more than peeing and pooping and sex.
Mhm.
It's how does that pelvic floor function in the context of when you are weight bearing on one leg in running? And
Mhm.
guess what? When this is shutting down, that ain't working either, which is probably why you had these issues in your hip or your knee or whatever.
Exactly.
I don't know why it took so freaking long to get here, and I still feel like we have a long way to go, but
Well, it's the
um,
patriarchy in medicine. You know what I mean? That's why.
that's another
That's
podcast.
actually the why. But that's why. I mean, like,
Yeah,
and I graduated 10 years ago
yeah,
and at UCSF, which is like an amazing medical institution, right? And like the anatomy program was like, in line with their medical school and dental school
yeah,
and pharmacological school. And, what did we have? Like we had those, we didn't dissect the pelvic floor like we did dissect every other part of the core, right?
right.
We had the 4-hour lecture that wasn't even about pelvic floor. I think it was a little bit about pregnancy. I don't even remember what it was about, right? And that was 10 years ago. And I know
Yeah,
that PT education has gotten better, but like a lot of people don't know. And then let's talk about how the pelvic floor is just, it's this weird 3D shape. It's hard to picture. We can't like
yeah,
go in the mirror and see all the
yeah,
different pelvic floor muscles. So there's a lot of reasons.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think with that too, I mean, and I'm so interested to talk with people that have worked in other areas because I do
Hmm.
think you come in with a benefit of not looking at it directly, and
Totally.
for you to have that neuro background. I mean, for me, I used to work a lot with pelvic pain, and back
Hmm.
when, back in the day, it was like you could only have overactivity with pelvic pain or pain with sex. And now in the last year or so, I don't know if you're noticing this, is like, we had that shift over to, okay, overactivity with stress incontinence.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, you know what? I've got money says that that's what we're seeing with pelvic organ prolapse. And then I also
100%.
think
Hmm.
with, when you understand kind of sensitization from a nervous
Hmm.
system perspective, when like, when somebody tells you your organ's falling out, your brain's going to go into hyper alert and hyper awareness. And I can't move your organ up, but can I down train your sensitivity? And I don't think I ever would have thought about that had I only treated postpartum. It was how I treated and looked at pelvic pain, and that's how I started to consider, like, I've got money says that 75% of the clients that we see, it's not underactivity at all. It's overactivity for about 70 million reasons. But like, it was so, you can't possibly be this because only this you're going to have pain with sex. And so many people don't have pain with sex, but yet there's overactivity there. But the fact we're even considering it now, and you understand that from a neuro's perspective,
Yes. Yes.
that's got to be cool to kind of bring that. And you've done it so early on in your career. Like, it took me, a long time to get to that. So
No, Carrie, you're a pioneer. You never forget that, right? And so, but you're right. But even like what you're saying is your experience in pelvic pain. I would raise that 75% of overactivity in my practice. I would raise that to about 95%.
yeah,
You would, now that you're saying that, you're like, no, in some part, you probably say some part of the pelvic floor. And the biotensegrity model of pelvic organ prolapse, and that I'm wearing a perfect dress for this, but for those of you who can't see me, think about the neckline of your shirt and like the neckline being the vagina, and then down low being the anus, and even like pulling tight on the bottom of your shirt and it pulls the neckline down, right? And
yep,
how many of the patients are we seeing, they're like, oh, I have prolapse and I also have chronic constipation. And then you get in
yeah,
and treat rectally and you feel such a back half of the pelvic floor pull, like literally you can feel it opening
yeah,
that hiatus up. And oh, and I also have tailbone pain, right? And so I think, yeah, you're 100% right. Like with my patients with spinal cord injury and stroke and brain injury with spasticity, right?
yeah,
And thinking about that spasticity and how when we actually got their, quote, core muscles actually with better motor control, and then also
hmm,
obviously all the calming the entire nervous system. We're putting you in a quiet room right now. We're dimming the lights. Like that's how
yeah,
we took tone down. We took their tone down by
yeah,
getting true core activation down in a calm setting. You hear my voice is settling down, right? And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I treat my patients now the exact same way.
Yeah.
I even think about like growing up, I rode horses a little bit too. And even
Yeah.
that, like working with animals and like when a horse got kind of spooked, right? That's the same thing as the pelvic floor. And I
Yeah.
tell my patients now, I'm like, we need to think of the pelvic floor kind of like an animal that's like a little bit scared. And we kind of like have to approach it a little bit.
Oh
You
my
know what I
God, I
mean?
do that with cats or dogs. I ask, oh my gosh,
Exactly.
I say the
Right.
same thing to clients. I'm like, do you like cats or
Yes.
dogs?
Yeah.
If you're going to have a scared cat or dog, are you gonna be like, here, have some food? Or are you gonna be like, here,
Yes.
come have have a little
Have a
snack?
little. Oh, you don't
Yeah.
want some? Okay, cool. We'll try again later. Yeah, it's all
Yes.
good. It's all
Oh my
good.
gosh, you do it with horses. Cool.
Yeah, horses, that's fine. I mean, whatever animal they like, right? But
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that that's really important, and I think that shocks all of our patients. And I know the pelvic PTs listening. This is now old news, right? Which is
Yeah.
awesome that this is now old news. But for so many of my patients, there are all of our patients. They're reading in Cosma about all the Kegels they have to do,
Yeah.
and don't get me wrong, I love pelvic floor strengthening. I think
Yes.
actually, we also in our field have swung the other way of don't do Kegels,
I
they're horrible.
know. We
And I
gotta
know
come
you've
back to the
talked about
center.
this a lot,
Yeah.
on all of your social media of, a lot of my patients, they say, oh my gosh, my so-and-so said to never do a Kegel again. And I say, okay, hey, we're not going to do a Kegel. We're going to work on closing and lifting your pelvic floor.
Yep.
Right.
You're like, I'm
And
just gonna
just
rename that.
this other thing. But I tell them, I say, sometimes it's nice to know what it feels like to fully
Yeah.
contract so then I can relax again afterwards, right? And how
Exactly.
that can be just as important and powerful for the brain to feel of what does on feel like so I know what off can feel like too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that there's so much of stuff that you're saying that I'm sitting here reflecting on a lot of these things I came to. It wasn't anything that anybody had taught me. It was something I kind of figured out because of the lens that I was looking through. And it's so cool to think that you're on the other side of the country with your background, you're kind of coming to the same conclusions.
Yeah.
But we're not doing it in a linear way. It's because we're understanding this in such a multifaceted way. And
Exactly.
it's super cool that that's our job. But I think it can also be really overwhelming to clients that are like, isn't there just one solution? And they'll go on social and be like, oh, well, I'll just do this, and then it didn't work, something's messed up with me, something's broken.
Yeah.
And what I try and explain to them is like, this is evolving, but that's a good thing, because I don't have anything to say that we can't get you where you want to go. I've got zero to say that you don't have potential. You are our N of one, and we are going to take all this stuff and we are going to do the best we possibly can with it and work together as a team to figure out what that is for you. And then I think that's when you explain that to somebody that, okay, no, your case is not in the research. That's not a bad thing. That doesn't make you a freak. It doesn't make you broken. It just, we use that evidence to guide and inform,
Yeah.
but you are not textbook, and that buys us a lot. That buys us a lot of freedom. That should not be anything that's scary at all.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, it's so cool to be like, oh my God, you had that thought too.
Yes. Yes. Because we're listening to people's bodies. We're in tune with that. And then we're also in tune with the fact that like this is just like every other area in the body. And if we would look at it that same way, I mean, and that's such an old way, we all say this about pelvic floor, like it's just like the elbow, it's just like the whatever. And in a lot of ways it is. And we can use all the same training principles, that we use in other parts of the body. But then we have to also acknowledge that it's not like every other part of the body. And there is way more of a link between that and the central nervous system.
Yes.
And way more of an emotional connection, right? If this
Yes.
area is like, there's so much shame in this area for all the reasons, pee poop, sex related, right?
Yeah.
Body image related. And so, but I look at that as like, how effing lucky are we to make this the center of our practices and get to bring in all those things? And, another reason why, like both, mine and your practices, I don't think that you're an insurance-based model either. And like, we have these hour-long sessions with our patients, and it is annoying, right? But like pelvic health, and the kind of practices we both have, we have to look at the whole patient, right? It's like, I'm not going to go in and be like, what's happening inside your vagina? Nice to meet you. It's like,
Right.
we look at the whole body, and that does take time if we want to be able to adequately treat out your hip and also
Yeah.
your neck that day too, because guess what, your neck and jaw pain are related, right? And can we do some of that intervaginal treatment? Can we do some of that interrectal treatment? Can we watch you run outside? Can we get your strength program back online,
Yeah.
right? And so that's something that it doesn't really fit in the traditional medical model right now.
Yeah.
And that's why, people are always saying, oh, pelvic PT isn't covered by insurance. And there actually is a lot of pelvic PT that is covered by
Yes,
insurance,
I think so
which is
too.
great. And people need
Yep.
to hear that. And also the pelvic PT that's covered by insurance, it cannot be a half-hour long session anymore. It's not appropriate.
Yeah. Well, and I think so I had a final question for you. Like, where do you where do you see things going? And I think the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, I feel like pelvic health's gotten this huge surge in popularity.
Mhm.
Everybody and their brother's doing it. It's super popular. But I also hear a lot of patients saying, well, it's not covered, which
Mhm.
you and I both know, like to some degree it's covered. But
Mhm.
then I see, like big box practices or hospital based, because they're under the crunch of insurance, and
Mhm.
reimbursements are being cut on a daily
Yeah.
basis. Like,
Yeah.
okay, guess what? You had an hour before, now you only have 45 minutes. Now you only have a half hour.
Mhm.
Um, how are we going to, on one hand, demand change in postpartum care when what's happening within, at least in the US and the medical system,
Mhm.
like it's not conducive for anybody getting listened to, the care that they deserve. Like, why should it take somebody 7 other providers to finally get to somebody like you or I? Like,
Mhm.
how do we drive change within not only, our field and how we train people and expectations, but how do we advocate for moms to demand better and not just take crappy care?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
That was a big question. I
It
know
is
you I
no,
know
no,
we're gonna
I'm
solve it right
joking.
now,
It's
but
yeah, in the next couple minutes, we're gonna figure it all out.
totally.
I mean, I think that, we as pelvic PTs right now, I think that it's just even it's our if we can just do a good job treating
Yeah.
every single person we treat, that is the way in some ways, right? Because it starts small. It starts with me having a treatment session with somebody and they go out and they tell their OB.
Yeah.
They go out and tell their partner and all of their friends. And those people, they go and tell somebody else too. And just kind of getting the word out there. And I do think that that eventually is moving all the way, quote, to the top. And we're seeing then that guess what? Coming in for pelvic PT is going to be way cheaper in the long run than going and sitting on some, little chair that's supposed to
Oh God.
activate your
Right.
pelvic floor, right? Or some of these really, really pricey surgeries, and seeing that this is the more cost effective option in the long
Yeah.
run as well, right? For so many things. I think it's going to take research. And I think the hard thing is so many of the people that are doing this work are moms. And again, back to the patriarchy, it's like you and I both aren't really making space in our lives to have our practice and to also do research, right?
Right.
And I think unfortunately that's a lot of the people that are in our field right now or in
Yeah.
are in a similar position because we've all been called to this work because we've seen how important it is in our own
Right.
bodies, right? And I think
Right.
that's we don't have a lot of people that are just these single maybe bachelors that have all this time on their hands not to bring gender and into it as well. But that's I think that is actually the reality right now, is that a
Yeah.
lot of the people who are driving change, we're putting all of our energy into our patients and we
Yep.
don't have a lot of extra bandwidth for advocacy. I know that
That
I
makes
don't. I'm not
sense.
prioritizing that as well. So I
Yeah.
think I don't know. I'm not sure how that's going to change. But I do think that making it a part of the traditional medical model would be amazing. I think that if every single person could go to their OB and there was an in-house pelvic PT in that same appointment that they could just go to right after they finish up with their OB, that would be amazing.
Hmm.
I think that the research is going to have to be there just to make insurance companies listen,
Hmm.
right? But I
Yeah.
also think that just people like you and I spreading the word that sometimes even out of network is even just one session can be just as valuable. And we know
Yep.
that all of our patients are also paying money for things like massage, and paying for, other things out of pocket right now, and showing them that this is something that is just as valuable, right?
Yeah.
Even, I mean, I've had patients, and I know you too, who maybe we've only had a session, maybe 2 sessions with them. And those 1 or 2 sessions, I've had patients come back and say completely
Yes.
changed everything.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's
Exactly.
not because of what I'm doing is so different than what anybody else would be doing. I'm not saying that. It's because we're simply giving them information that they haven't heard anywhere
Yeah.
else,
When
about their own personal body too.
Yeah, and I think that's and I'm gonna springboard off of that one, going back, with my background, I did run a residency for a period of
Hmm.
time and create curriculum, and I've taught in university setting. So I feel like I come from a place of knowing here. Um, I think also when you go into this work, and this is probably just as a PT as a whole, not necessarily unique to pelvic health, being open to like multifaceted backgrounds like you're talking about.
Hmm.
You and I are having this conversation and we're having similar ideas because we're coming from a place of we don't function as technicians. We're not
Hmm.
just like, okay, we're going to check this box, check this box. And I think our training needs to change. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother podcast.
Hmm.
And again, I come at this. I've written items for the national PT exam. I've written items for the specialty exam. Like I know how these processes work. And unfortunately, how we're trained is very linearly.
Hmm. Hmm.
How I practice is so beautifully multidimensional.
Yeah.
Um, that's where the good stuff is. And that's how you and I can turn results in 2 visits, where someone else that's only going on the linear path and seeing twice a week for 6 weeks by the insurance model isn't
Hmm.
going to get to the same place. And I would
Hmm.
love to see acknowledgement of that
Hmm.
in our field, and
Hmm.
an evolution that's what practice is. That's
Hmm.
what, we're a doctoring profession, we're critical thinkers, we're problem solving. And that for me is my superpower. I don't work well in linear and minutia
Yeah.
at all.
No, no.
I
And the
can't.
pelvic floor work doesn't either, right? It doesn't.
No.
It's unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean,
I
like
wish it
these,
could.
but you know what? Yes and no. Like,
Yeah.
but that's where, I mean, I had a great physio that I used to work with who was Australian trained, and kind of to look at patterns and things like that. And I think some of that comes with time and
Yeah.
experience, but also the appreciation that things aren't going to be the same, but they're going to be similar. And we can kind of recognize these sorts of patterns, and that can jump steps and get there sooner. And again, I think if you look at an insurance model, even if you look at, insurance is paying, is insurance going to pay? Are they going to be happy to pay for 2 visits versus 12, and you get the same or actually better outcomes in the two? I don't know where this is going to mesh up eventually, but
Yeah.
I
That'd
think
be
we,
interesting though. Oh my gosh, I never thought about that. I feel like, you had a qualitative survey based
yeah,
situation, and it was like after 4 1-hour visits versus,
right.
8 even 30-minute, right? And
Yeah.
oh, that'd be cool. Okay.
Because
All right.
I do, yeah, in our free time, we will create this study.
When someone doesn't need a snack or a ride to practice, or we're
Oh my
trying
God.
to get in that last patient of the day,
And
before that.
your oldest is 6, so going into what grade?
Going into first grade in two
Okay.
weeks. And then my
Okay.
youngest is in preschool. And then
Okay.
we might try to have another in the next year. So,
Okay.
thoughts and prayers, right? If that ends up happening.
Yes.
Because yeah, it's a lot, right? It's a lot to balance.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like, what a gift, right? To be able to be a mom right now in my practice, because
Yeah.
how many things did we tell our patients before we had kids, right? I mean, like, I think I was, posting on Instagram about like,
Cringeworthy.
never use those bumbo chairs. Like, that's not good for development,
Oh,
you
I have a good
know?
one. Put your baby on the other hip. No, no, it is
No.
this way because I can only
Yes, exactly. Like, only plastic, never plastic toys that light up. It's like only plastic toys that light up, because that's going to give me an extra, blank amount of minutes. And I think, and then even exercises, right? And like my
Yes.
patients will say, like, okay, I want to have a program to do every day, like about 30 minutes. And like, I'm going to give you 2 exercises that you're going to try to do 3 times a week,
Yes.
right? Because that's what's realistic. And this is when you're going to do them. Look, when you're coffee is brewing, that's when you're going to do the first
Oh my
one.
God, I do the same thing. Like
Yeah.
I leverage the hell. I don't know if you've read James Clear Atomic
Yeah,
Habits. It's my
exactly.
favorites.
Exactly.
Oh my
Habit
gosh.
coupling. Yes,
Oh
yes,
yes.
yes.
Oh my God. And so we sit down and we do that because
Yeah.
if somebody just tells you you're not going to go home and do that, but
No.
that's how we get the results because we
Yes.
understand it. Like I have the rule. I'm like, Mom 101, how little do you need to do so no one dies?
So
Yes. Like
exactly.
there's no CVS length receipt. Like
No. And
no,
then
because if I'm
also,
not
I
going to do
think,
it, you're
yeah,
not
for the
going to do it.
pelvic PTs out there too, like, how can you also help your patients take it outside of their, this is my
Yes.
5 minutes of day that I do my PT.
Mhm.
Now I'm going to put it on the shelf in a box and I'm going to live my day. It's like,
Yes.
how can we, and this is what I saw with neuro about, like, we trained the same activity, whether that's hip extension in different positions, right? Because we
Yep.
knew if you learned it in supine and then you can do it on your side, then you can do it in tall kneeling. The brain loves that. It feeds off of practicing the same concept over different
Yes.
positions, right? And so when you're stressed out, can you practice your relaxation? When you're in traffic, can you
Yes.
practice your relaxation? When your kids are like having an issue, right? And that's also when you get the results, is when you can like
Totally.
take it out of the silo of PT and put it into
Exactly.
the life.
Well,
And that's what we
in
can do.
life, yes,
Mhm.
and that's
Yeah.
what we talk about too, like, like, okay, you've got your 5 minutes of PT exercises, but what's happening the other 19 hours that you're awake? And I
Yes.
always start with notice because you can't change what you don't notice. So once you notice it,
Yes.
you can't unnotice it. And
No.
if you do like looking at even just breath and tension, and God
Yeah.
knows COVID has had an impact on all of this.
Yes.
Like if
Yes.
you are just aware, if you are not breathing, breathe. Like I'm not talking Zen Buddha breath, like I ain't gonna make
No.
you do that,
Mm-mm.
but like just a little better than you did before, or just a little less, or
Exactly.
just let it go a little bit more. And it's funny because I'm telling them, but I'm also trying to remind myself.
Oh, yeah. Oh, because we're the worst, right? Because what you just said about your patients as a surgeon, and I tell my patients this too in those fields of, we also can be patients, right? Like, we can give ourselves the grace that, like,
Yeah,
Sarah isn't always a PT. I'm also just a person or a
yeah,
mom or whatever, right? And
yeah,
so, yeah, you know what? I'm not actually doing squats all, like, I'm not sitting down and, okay, this is my time to work on squatting today. But
yeah.
am I squatting better when I'm unloading the dishwasher every time not every time, but maybe
Exactly.
I'm thinking about that when I pick up
Yep.
toys, then that person can get their squats in during the day as well.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly. I love it. All right.
Yeah.
Question I ask everybody at the end.
Yes.
What does being active postpartum mean to you?
I say it is doing something that makes you feel happy, joyful, strong, maybe helped you adjust your own limiting thought on what you thought was possible, but
That's so
something
good.
that deep in your heart is true and real and good for your body.
I love that. And there was a time, again, before I had kids, that I've been like, "Ugh, that's so sappy." And now I'm like, "Oh my God, she's so right. She's so right. It has to be
I
meaningful."
know, isn't it so gross sometimes? Like, we're so gross, like, so many Hallmark card moments, and
I
it's
love
like,
it
it's
though.
actually true, and all the, I mean, we always say, right, all the
I
things
love
about
it.
our kids, yeah, it's all true.
Exactly, exactly. Well, thank you so much. If you want to find Sarah on Instagram, she's pelvic at Pelvic Potential. If you're in Santa Cruz or California, please go find her there. Thank you, my dear. It was so nice to chat with you, and
Yes.
we need to get in the same location at the
Yes, we
same
will.
time.
It's gonna be amazing. I mean, Carrie, actually, the world can barely handle it. That's why it's been preparing itself for that moment
You
when
know
we
what? I think
finally
that
meet in
you're right.
person. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. All right. Thanks so much.
Yes, thanks for having me.